Okay, all right. Awesome. So yes, so I work for an organization called Whale and Dolphin Conservation. We are a nonprofit, international, so we have offices in 5 different countries throughout the world, plus a visitor center in the Scottish Dolphin Center in Scotland. But I'm speaking to you from Massachusetts, and so yeah, I did migrate up the coast a little bit here to the New England area, and our office is based in Plymouth for the North American branch of the organization. And I'm going to be giving you kind of an introduction to a few different whale and dolphin species. There are quite a few, so we can only kind of touch on a few of them today, but hope to give you a pretty good overview of some of these critters that we spend so much time and effort working to protect. Just a little bit of context about our organization. We are considered the leading global charity dedicated solely to the protection of whales and dolphins. And our vision is a world where every whale and dolphin is safe and free. And that's not only a noble gesture, but an essential means to sustain the future of our Earth by increasing the planet's climate resiliency. It's a little bit wordy, but I'll draw your attention to the guiding principle at the bottom here, where whales play a critical role in the health of our marine and global ecosystems. So that's a little bit of a teaser because I'm going to get into that, but more towards the end. But basically, not only do we just generally love whales and dolphins, but they do play a characteristics, and these whales are found all throughout the world. This illustration here is showing you 89 different species. And I was going to make a joke about, grab your coffee, we're going to dive in and go through them one by one, but we will definitely not, because for a number of reasons, but also because even though I've been in this field for 11 years now, there's still a whole lot that I don't know. So I'm going to be sharing stuff with you today, but there's still a lot more out there to learn. And I hope to embrace some of that as I move forward in my career. But
really quickly, something I want to say, if you have questions, everybody listening, put them in the question and answer section, and I will read them to Monica at the end of her presentation.
Thought you were going to tell me my internet was cutting out already. That always seems to happen. Okay, so yeah, so a lot of different species here. We're not going to go through them all. I'll introduce you to a few of them. And just also to put everything into scale, hopefully you can see in the middle here, there is a diver on this illustration, just to kind of show you the scale of these animals and just how large and magnificent they are. So to break it down, and for anyone who's not familiar, we use the word cetaceans, which does include all whales, dolphins, and porpoises. So there are currently 88 known living species of cetaceans. And I say and emphasize known because some of you may have heard off the coast of Mexico, which is pretty exciting. Not confirmed yet. It'll probably be a while before those results come back definitively. So that could be up to 89 living species. So this number is often changing. So that's kind of another exciting component to it as well, that as we research them more and look into things more, that we find new species sometimes. So these species are broken down into 2 categories. So we have the baleen whales. There are 14 known species of baleen whales. And baleen is the name of the structure that they have in their mouth that they use for feeding. It's a filtering structure, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on that in the next slide. But they don't have any teeth, so they're not chewing or biting their prey as they're eating. These species are generally solitary. They do not live in pods. So most people, when they think of whales, they think of pods. And that is the case for some of the species, but not the baleen whales. We certainly do see them form associations, or they might travel in groups for a short period of time, but they are not long-term associations, and they're not family groups as pods generally are. So this does include most of the large whale species like the humpback whale, the blue whale, and the right whale. The only really larger whale species that's not part of the baleen whale group is the sperm whale, and they belong to the toothed whales. So given the name, these whales have teeth in their mouth, not baleen. There are currently 74 known living species of toothed whales, and these animals will hunt larger prey. So they will eat an entire fish at one time. They will catch those fish with their teeth. They don't actually use their teeth to chew. So if you were to look into the mouth of one of these animals, all of their teeth are actually the same shape and size, which that they can eat them. These toothed whales all do live in their family pods. So they're a close-knit group that travel together throughout their whole life. And this includes all of the dolphins and porpoises as well. So this is kind of a fun trivia question. We actually get asked a lot, and it's really just an issue of semantics about whether dolphins are whales, because technically, yes, they are classified as a type of whale, but further classified as dolphins. So if you ever go to a trivia night and you're asked that question, yes, dolphins and porpoises are all technically types of whales. So baleen, for those who are not familiar, again, this is the filtering structure that hangs from the upper jaw of a whale's mouth. It is only in their upper jaw, so the lower jaws of these species are completely open, and that allows them to actually take in an entire school of fish at one time. So these larger whales are eating smaller food. Might sound a little counterintuitive, but when they're eating an entire school of fish at one time, that makes it worth their while. And so this baleen helps them to do that. So hopefully you can see well enough in the pictures, this baleen hangs down in individual plates, and it's a row of these plates that kind of look like vertical blinds. And so this helps them to filter the fish from the seawater, because just like humans, whales would actually get dehydrated if they drank too much salt water. So they can ingest a little bit, but not too much. And so this baleen helps these whales to separate their food from the water so that they're not getting dehydrated. The other fun fact about baleen is that it's made from keratin, which is the same protein we have in our hair and our fingernails. So a lot of times if I'm talking to kids about baleen, I'll make a joke that, you know, these whales basically just have hairy fingernails in their mouth, and that's what they're using to catch their food. But it's a really practical device for them. And if I can get my later video to play, you'll get to see that in action a little bit. So when I was trying to figure out which species to talk with you about today, I figured I would focus on 3 of the ones that are most focal to us at WDC. And those are the humpback whales, orcas, and North Atlantic right whales. And I know the first 2 species are pretty common. Most people are usually somewhat familiar with them. The last one, maybe not so much. I'll actually be interested to see how familiar all of you are with this species, because they are lesser known, but also really important to us and just in general. So starting with the humpback whale, this is what we'd call kind of a mid-sized baleen whale. So they're 45 to 55 feet long, which is about the size of a school bus. So that is still obviously massive. They're kind of tubby. They're pretty round. They have that hump in front of the dorsal fin on their back that is usually one of the first things that you would see if you were looking at a humpback whale in the water. And they have these bumps all over their head called tubercles. Those are actually really large hair follicles. So out of each one of those bumps is a single hair, stiff, kind of like a cat's or a dog's whiskers. And they have these really long white flippers. And so the Latin name for humpback whale is Megaptera novaengliae, which actually translates to mean big-winged New Englander. So named after those long white flippers, and because they were first identified in New England. They do often raise their tail out of the water when they're diving. So that's another really helpful way that you might be able to see if a whale is nearby. Humpbacks are cosmopolitan, so they are seen all throughout the world, but they don't generally cross ocean basins. So because we're based in Massachusetts, our focal population really are the North Atlantic humpbacks. But even within that, they tend to have high site fidelity, which means that we see a lot of the same whales go to each location year after year. So they have their preferred habitats even within the wider ocean basins. But you can find humpbacks in all of the world's oceans. Some of these populations are endangered, but not all. So the North Atlantics that we do focus on currently are not considered endangered, although in recent years, there have been a higher than normal number that have died. And so that's definitely of concern. And the biggest threats to these whales are entanglement in fishing gear and vessel strikes. And I'm not going to go really too much into the threats today because that also can take up a lot of time, but I'm definitely happy to answer any questions that people do have about these threats because I think it is important to have an understanding of them. But these whales are kind of known for their acrobatics. And I just want to point out in this picture on the left here, so obviously a pretty calm day on the water. You can see pretty well, but hopefully and when we see them up here off the coast of New England, which is their feeding grounds, their flippers actually kind of glow a little bit green, and that's because of all the phytoplankton in the water. So whether there's, it's a phytoplankton rich area or not, those big white flippers are usually pretty recognizable when you're a little bit closer to the whales. Hopefully this video plays okay. It's already almost a little bit jumpy on my screen, but I just wanted to show you a whale breaching because it is awesome to see. But also wanted to share it with the caveat that it is not actually a super common behavior for these whales. I know a lot of people who might be familiar with humpbacks may have seen National Geographic or Discovery Channel documentary where they see this magnificent footage. It really does not happen that often, and it tends to be very unpredictable. This video did not even play well for me. Let me try it again. Oh man, I don't think it's gonna work like I hoped. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I don't even know. I don't know why it's, oh.
There it is.
Okay. I know, it's like not even playing for me and then it cut off. I'm sorry. That it's a lot better than what you saw, guaranteed. Let's try this one. All right, this one's playing a little bit better for me, so hopefully that comes through. So this is a whale that's starting to hunt for food, and these humpbacks in the North Atlantic do something called kick feeding, where they kick their tail like you just hopefully saw. And this sort of helps to disorient and stun the fish that they're after so that they're easier to school together in a closer ball for the whales to come up and eat. And so that's what's about to happen here. So a wide open mouth, so that's baleen hanging down.
I think the video is eating up your bandwidth and you are cutting in and out. Can you hear me? Monica, we've lost her. She's probably talking away, thinking that she's talking to us all. Oh, lost her completely. She's gonna have to sign back on. Okay, time step, everybody. Da 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 da. So while we're waiting for her to come back on, Carlos, can you send her an email?
With the link again?
Well, sure. Just
Okay.
to let her know. I'm sure she knows that she got kicked off.
Yep.
But anyway, while we are waiting for Monica to come back, Vamp, Richard Vamp. Oh, here we go. Yay! I was just trying to vamp and had nothing to say. I think what happened is that your video was eating up your bandwidth.
Yeah,
So I
probably.
think that's what happened. So maybe just, stick with pictures or.
Yeah,
Okay.
totally fair. So sorry about that. It
That's
figures my internet is usually fine until I need it to actually be
How
fine.
it always worked, right?
Technology.
I
Anyway,
will, I will let you go back. We saw the whale coming up with its mouth open to feed after the kick.
okay.
What's it called? A kick what?
Kick feeding.
Kick feeding. Okay.
Yep.
So I'm gonna.
Okay. All right. So you get the idea. But you can probably also find videos online too that will play a lot better than what I just shared with you. So we will skip videos moving forward and hopefully not have any further issues. All right, so humpback whales, we can actually identify individuals, not just for humpbacks, but for a lot of species. But humpbacks, it's a little bit easier because they have these really unique patterns on the underside of their tail. And so it's similar to a human fingerprint in that no two patterns are exactly the same. And it is also a pattern that they're born with. It can change a little bit over time, but for the most part, it's pretty well defined from birth. So our ideal scenario is if we're out there watching these whales and they usually will bring their tail up as they're going on a dive. And so our ideal scenario is to get a picture of that underside of their tail where this pattern is. And that way we can recognize these individuals that way. But there are a couple of other things that we can look at as well, one of them being their dorsal fins. So they have slightly different shapes. They will sometimes have slightly different markings on them. Some dorsal fins have a lot of white, others are just solid pigment. And we can also look at unique scarring on individuals. And again, this applies to all whales. But in this picture on the bottom left here, there's this kind of bumpy looking scar on the back of this whale. And so that would definitely be unique to this individual. And most likely that's actually from a collision with a boat of some sort. So we have 3 different ways that we can identify humpback whales. And the reason why, there's many reasons why that's important, but it also kind of becomes a little bit fun because we can really put together family trees for some of these whales that we've been watching for a long time. And we do give whales names. There are a couple of rules for that. And then this is also specific for actually Gulf of Maine humpbacks within the Atlantic. So we'll kind of, researchers in the area will get together and vote on names for these individuals. We can track them over time by looking at their tails and then really get an idea of their life history and their family. So in this case, there's a whale named Salt, who was the first whale ever identified in this population. We've been watching her since the mid-70s. And in that time, we've seen her come back to the area with 15 different calves. And she now has 16 grand calves and 2 great grand calves. So it's really, really amazing to know 4 different generations of this whale family. And so all of this is possible because we can identify these individuals. And a couple of the other things that we learn about them is their migration patterns. So when you photograph one whale in 2 different locations, you get an idea that they're using both of those habitats. In many cases, they can be seen hundreds, if not a couple thousand miles apart. So that's really how we started to learn in the Atlantic that these whales that are spending time in New England in the summer are heading all the way down to the Caribbean during the winter. We can get an idea of their overall health over time. If we did see them with some sort of a traumatic injury one year, we can monitor them over time. Again, by recognizing that it's the same whale that we're looking at, and just keep an eye on them generally and how they're doing. So a lot of really helpful information. So now I'm going to put you guys on the spot here a little bit. I can't see all your responses, but I'm gonna give you a little quiz real quick. So looking at the 4 different pictures here, there's 2 whales. So your goal is to match the 2 similar pictures with each other. So just imagine if I asked you to kind of draw a line between the 2 that you thought were the same whale. So I'll give you a second to do that before I show the answers. All right. So here's what we have. So A is the same whale as D, and B is the same whale as C. So these flukes are pretty similar in a lot of ways, but when you look a little more closely, there are a couple unique features that are different. So I'm just going to circle those here for B and C. You have a couple of marks on the very edges, outer edges of the fluke, and then this kind of one sprouty looking thing in the middle. And then for A and D, similar thing, looking along the edges is where we tend to see a lot of the unique distinct marks. So hopefully you can all see that pretty well. There are over 3,000 whales in this population. So when we do document a whale, it can take a while to really try to figure out who it is and match it to the known whales in our catalog. So one of these whales, A and D, that's Salt, the same whale who I just showed you the family tree for. And then the other 2 are a picture of a whale named Anvil. So this is kind of a little peek into whale research. And if you like puzzles, it's fun, but some are harder than others. And so I have quite literally spent like 4 hours at a time staring at my computer screen trying to match a whale before. So it can also get pretty frustrating as well. It does require quite a bit of patience, but it is all worth it, knowing all of the important research benefits that come from it. All right, so shifting gears to our next focal species, which are orcas. And like humpbacks, some of these populations of orcas are endangered, but not all. A lot of those who are endangered were originally decimated by the captivity industry decades ago, where these whales were captured from their wild populations and brought into captive facilities for display. And so when you remove a high enough number of individuals from a population at the same time, it's really hard for them to recover from that. So these whales, although they aren't taken from the wild really anymore, there's still a lot of modern day threats that prevent their ability to recover. So in the case of orcas, prey depletion, pollution, and noise disturbance are a few of the biggest threats that they face. There are a few different types of orcas, and ecotypes is a word that you might hear people use when they're talking about orcas, but that gets a little bit more refined than a little more detail than I'm planning to go into here. But I did just want to point out the 3 main different types of orcas, and those are the transients, the offshores, and the residents. So at quick glance, they all look very similar, and they are in a lot of ways, but they do have their differences as well. So starting with the residents, these are the ones who are not really undertaking really long migrations. They are more or less using the same habitat range. And they tend to be a little bit smaller than the transients, for example. So the transients it's kind of in the name, they are the ones that are traveling a little bit further, a lot further in some cases. And the transients are also the ones who are marine mammal eaters, and the ones that got them their name, the killer whale, as well. So these are the ones that will hunt seals or even other whale species. So a little bit more aggressive. They're also a little bit bigger. And then there's the offshores, which are the smallest of the 3 types of orcas here. And I don't know how well you can see all the text on this slide either, but there's like slight differences in their dorsal fin shapes and some of their pattern markings and things like that. So you'd really kind of have to be pretty familiar with orcas in general to be able to identify them on the spot, I think. I doubt that I could even do it because I've never really seen one in the wild before. We don't see them too often here in the Atlantic, but they're definitely known in the Pacific. And so within all of these orcas, the ones that we spend a lot of our time working on are the southern residents. And they are a resident population in the Pacific Northwest. You can see their habitat range down there in the bottom left corner. And these are also a transboundary species. So they migrate between Canadian and US waters, which means that our respective governments have to work together pretty well in order to protect them as an endangered species. A big part of what they deal with is prey depletion. And so they're salmon eaters. They're very, very picky about the types of salmon that they eat. And so currently, and in recent years, they're just not finding as much food as they would like. And so when you're not maintaining a high nutrition status, that makes other things really difficult, like for females to bring a baby to term and continue to nourish that baby as it grows. So a lot of residual impacts come from just not being able to find food. We can also identify individual orcas, and a lot of them do also have names within their populations. And identifying orcas is quite different from identifying humpbacks. So they have different marking patterns on their bodies called the ocular patch for one, which is above their eye. And that's that big white patch there. So those can be slightly different shapes and sizes. And then there's also the saddle patch, which is not quite as distinct. It's a little bit more of a mottled grayish color, but that exists behind their dorsal fins. And so those are two of the main ways that researchers can tell individuals apart, in addition to any nicks or cuts that might be in their dorsal fins as well. And I want to make another note about dorsal fins, because if you're looking at this picture, you'll see that the one on the right is way bigger than the one on the left. And that is actually a way to distinguish males from females. So there is some what we call sexual dimorphism, where there are noticeable differences between genders. And so the smaller dorsal fins are females and the larger dorsal fins are males. So that could be another way to at least narrow it down, you know, if you happen to be out seeing orcas within a known population, you can tell based on dorsal fin size, at least whether it's a male or a female. All right, and then our final focal species is the North Atlantic right whale. These guys, I'll be the first to admit, they're a little funny looking. Certainly not as aesthetically pleasing as a lot of people think the orcas might be, but still worthy of our protection and respect nonetheless. They are 45 to 55 feet long, so about the same length as the humpbacks, but these whales are even fatter, rounder. They have a lot of blubber on their bodies. They are very dense, if you will. They do not have a dorsal fin, which is kind of unusual. There's not too many species that lack a dorsal fin. So that is one distinct feature for them. Like the humpbacks, they do also bring their tails out of the water when they're diving pretty often. So that is something that you could potentially see from a right whale. And if you're looking at the whale's head, there's these kind of bumps, colored spots all over, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but those are called callosities. And those are these whales' unique markings. So we'll look at a couple of individual right whales in a second. This is a critically endangered species. And I'll mention too, since I don't know where exactly everybody is listening from today, there are actually 3 different species of right whales. And the species distinctions are also, again, based on ocean basins in which they live. So we have the North Atlantic right whale, the North Pacific right whale, and the Southern right whale. And so North Atlantic right whales are a critically endangered species. The current population estimate is somewhere around 350. And that number has fluctuated quite a bit in the recent past. They did see a period of growth for a while, and now that has taken a downturn, unfortunately. So they've been experiencing what we call an unusual mortality event since 2017. And basically what that means is that there's a higher than normal expected number of individuals that have been turning up dead. And so that basically once that is declared as an unusual mortality event, the federal agency that's charged with protecting these whales can launch an official investigation into trying to figure out what exactly is causing these deaths. And similar to the humpbacks, the biggest known threats are entanglements in fishing gear and vessel strikes. So a couple of other things to note about these right whales and why there's only 350 left. And to put that into context, and I forgot to even address the reason for the name. Let me just go back real quick. The North Atlantic right whale, it actually got its name because it was considered the right whale to hunt.
Arr, call me Ishmael.
Yeah, so back a couple centuries ago, I guess, when hunting was still really prominent worldwide, this was a target species. There were a few of them, and generally the larger whales were ones to go after, but the North Atlantic right whale in particular is pretty slow moving, so it was also an easy target. So they were also really buoyant. I've mentioned they have all that blubber that makes them pretty fat. Blubber is buoyant in the water, and so that also made it easier to tow them back to shore once they were hunted. So with all of that in mind, researchers think that there were about 10,000 of these whales before whaling really took over, and now we're looking at a population of around 350. So a very significant loss over time. And so we have a lot of work to do to try to protect these whales. But a couple of other factors that work against them, they are also nicknamed the urban whale because they are most often seen within 50 miles of the coastline. So I don't know why that is. It would make sense if whales are being disturbed in their natural habitat that they just kind of swim elsewhere, but they have reasons for not doing that. Sticking to the coastline might be a more direct migration path for them, so they're using less energy that way. I don't really know for sure, but yeah, so they're called the urban whale. This map on the right here is showing you their habitat range. So kind of like the southern resident orcas in the Pacific Northwest, these whales are transboundary between Canada and the US, but in the Atlantic coast. And so they're also have been impacted by climate change. And it's a little bit more of an indirect way, because if you think about being a whale that's covered in a really thick layer of blubber, you're not likely to notice a couple of degrees of temperature change in the surrounding ocean. What you are going to notice is that the places where you used to go to find your food, which are really tiny little copepods, as we call them, little critters that are about the size of a grain of rice, those animals are going to be very impacted by slight changes in temperature. So as a right whale, you're going to all these places where you used to find your food, and now you're not finding it anymore. So they're having to find new habitats where they can locate their food, but those new habitats don't always have the same level of protection as the old ones that we have been protecting for them for a while. So it's kind of a compound issue for these whales as they're kind of starting to venture out into newer locations. And we're just trying to keep up and make sure that we can keep an eye on them. So one of those being what I've just circled on the map here is the Gulf of St. Lawrence in Canada. Hardly ever used to see North Atlantic right whales up there, and now they're being seen in much larger numbers. And so this kind of all started in 2017, which was the year when they started also with that unusual mortality event that I mentioned. I'm going to skip this video and go right into how we identify North Atlantic right whales. This is also different, and they are unique. They're the only species I know of where we have to just look at their faces, basically. Only species of whale, I should say. So all of these pictures that you're seeing here were taken from a plane overhead. Aerial surveys are one of the best ways to track and monitor these whales. And so all of these bumps and white markings that you're seeing form what we call the callosity pattern. And those are unique for each whale as well. So they're given names based on these markings in most cases. So the first whale on the left here, that part that I've circled, might kind of look like a spoon. And so this whale just actually a couple months ago just received its name, and it is named Spoon. So the idea is to try to give them names based on markings that will be easy for researchers to later identify. The one in the middle here, the mark that I just circled, this whale is named Snow Cone. So that marking kind of looks like a snow cone, which is, I think, one of the more popular names as of late. And then the whale on the right here, this one's a little bit more abstract, but somebody suggested that they thought this kind of looked like a little set of Russian nesting dolls that were unnested. And so this whale received the name Babushka, which is Russian for an older woman or a grandmother. So a little insight into naming North Atlantic right whales. All right, so I know we're running a little bit behind, partly due to my technical difficulties, but I'm gonna go through a few of these whale species superlatives. So this will kind of be a little bit more interactive too, just in terms of, I'm gonna give you a few hints for some of these and then announce the winning species. So let's start with the biggest. So I am the biggest animal in the world. I reach lengths of over 100 feet or 30 meters. That's about the length of a professional basketball court. I'm the biggest animal to ever have lived, even bigger than the dinosaurs. And I'm a baleen whale. And I'm a blue whale. So I'm gonna guess there's probably at least a few of you on here that are familiar with the species. They are known for being the biggest. They also win the award for having the biggest heart. That heart can be about 1,000 pounds and as big as a polar bear. So quite massive. We'll switch gears and go to the smallest. And I'll be impressed actually if people are familiar with this one. So I am the smallest whale species. I only reach lengths of around 5 feet. My name is Spanish for small cow. And I am a toothed whale. I'm the vaquita. And so the vaquita is actually a type of porpoise, and yeah, only around 5 feet. So it might actually be the only one that's really smaller than humans. The vaquita is critically endangered. So there, as far as we know, there's only a couple dozen of them left. I don't have time to really go into some of the recent efforts to try to protect these species, but quick Google search will probably get you to some of that information. But it's become a real struggle, and just holding out hope that we can turn it around for them. Fastest species. So I'm the second largest whale species. I cruise at speeds of 23 miles per hour, but can sprint at 34 miles per hour. Because of my speed, I'm called the Greyhound of the Sea. And I am a baleen whale. So this one also I don't think is too commonly known, but this is a fin whale or a finback whale. And so they can reach lengths of about 70 feet long. And this is a species that we also see here in New England. Pretty impressive to see for sure. And then sei whales are a close second. They look very similar, but they do have their differences. So a couple of these species that are really cruising out there in the oceans. All right, the loudest. So I don't sing, but when I do make a sound, it is the loudest. The clicks I make reach volumes of 235 decibels, which is louder than a rock concert or a jet engine. Since I'm so loud, I can communicate with my friends that are 30 plus miles away. and I'm a toothed whale. So that would be a sperm whale. So yeah, these guys are really, really loud. And the key hint here is the word clicks. So they make these unique clicks that are kind of, other species might make similar sounds, but the clicks are really indicative of sperm whales. And these guys also win the award for the biggest brain, which is about 20 pounds. And if you look closely at the whales in this picture here, their head is about a third of the size of the body. So you have a lot of room for that big brain. And then also all of the spermaceti oil that was heavily sought by whalers. So there's a lot happening in that large head of theirs. All right, best vocalist. The males are known to be the avid singers, adapting their song to the environment and who they are with. Scientists think I sing both to attract mates, but to also figure out the environment I'm in. I'm a baleen whale, and my songs can be heard from over 1,500 miles away. So who am I? I think the singing is the key word here. So these are humpback whales. And yes, the males are known for their long and dramatic songs. And as a frame of reference, for 1,500 miles away, that's about the distance from Florida to Maine. So that's a really long way to be communicating with others. All right, closest family ties. My family is very close, and I will live with my mother and our pod for my whole life. So the word pod there could be a clue. Sometimes my pods can contain 4 different generations. Our pods tend to stick to the cultural norms of where to live, what to eat, and more. The eldest female is the one in charge, and they tell the group where and when to feed. So who am I? I'm a toothed whale, and I'm an orca. So family is life to them. They stay with their family, and it's all these cultural traditions that, again, I wish I could get into a little bit more, but maybe in a later section. All right, best gymnast. I'm known for my aerial displays. I can complete several full body rotations or barrel rolls mid-flight. I can leap up to 14 times in a row, and a single spinning leap can include as many as 4 body revolutions. Spinning is a hint here. And I'm a toothed whale. So this is the spinner dolphin. And so these guys, I heard that you hopefully will have an upcoming trip to Maui, and the spinner dolphin is a species that is seen in Hawaiian waters. So I have not seen them in person, but from what I have seen of them, they're really, really amazing to see. All right, and then the oldest, I live in icy, cold Arctic waters year-round. I'm slow moving and slow growing, and do not reach sexual maturity until around 20 to 25 years old. Scientists don't know how old I can get, but some signs point to at least 150 or even 200 years. And I'm a baleen whale. So the answer here is a bowhead whale. And these whales look very similar to North Atlantic right whales, except they don't have that same callosity pattern all over their face. And yeah, they're an Arctic species. And the way that we know some of them have been around for 150 to 200 years is because they've actually found old remnants of whaling tools in a whale that washed up and stranded. These whaling tools, they could date back to a certain frame of time that was roughly 150 years ago. So kind of a bizarre way to figure that out, but pretty impressive, and an Arctic species. So their habitat likely has something to do with that. So I had a little bit more prepared, but I know we're running over on time, and I want to make sure we save time for questions. So I'll defer to you, Richard, as to whether I should keep going, or if we should stop now and go through questions.
How are we doing on time here? Let's see. Can't do that. You just go ahead I'm fascinated. I keep talking to you, even though my sound is off. I'm like, orca, it's an orca. So, why don't you go ahead a little bit longer, and then we'll go ahead and do questions then.
Okay, sounds good. And that actually makes me really happy. I hope everybody's doing that, because
I hope so too.
it's hard to make things interactive, but that was kind of my aim here. So I'm glad that it worked.
Okay, I'm gonna close off and you go ahead.
Okay. All right. So this slide, I just wanted to say we have a full species guide on our website at us.whales.org. So if you want to learn more about any other species, we've got you covered there. This, I just gave you a glimpse into a few of them here. I'm going to skip over this a little bit just for the sake of time and just say that whales in the US are federally protected, and they have been since the 70s. So these protections are basically in place to prevent humans from disturbing them, harassing them, any way altering their natural behaviors. And so I'm not going to end on this sad note, but I think it is important to mention that for all of these species that I've talked about, and especially all of the ones that are endangered, these whales, with only a few exceptions, these whales do not have any natural predators. So unfortunately, the sole reason why they're so endangered is because of human interactions. And so for a long time, it was just because we didn't know any better, but now we do. And we know that the impacts of some of our behaviors are having. And so we have an opportunity to change that. And so I just wanted to give a few guidelines here in terms of like going out and actually seeing whales, that there are guidelines in place for responsible wildlife viewing. These guidelines can and do change by region and also by species. So the North Atlantic right whale that I mentioned, there's actually a regulation where you can't, by law, you can't get closer than 500 yards to these whales. But all other whales in this area, it's just guidelines, viewing guidelines. And so since we likely have people from many different locations right now, I would encourage you to learn more about your local viewing guidelines. And that first link there will take you to a page where you can learn more about your region. And I just wanted to say NOAA Fisheries is the federal agency that's charged with protecting all whales and dolphins and porpoises, all cetaceans, marine mammals. They're also the organization that you can report sightings to. And so they'll always want to know about sightings of whales who are injured, in distress, entangled in fishing gear, or if you happen to unfortunately see a dead whale out on the water. And so that second link, fisheries.noaa.gov/report, you can figure out the local reporting number there if you were to come across an animal in one of those conditions. Generally speaking, in terms of viewing guidelines, there are a few kind of best practices that I wanted to share here. And I think this also kind of really just applies whether you're driving a boat or even in the water with whales or near whales. And so in order to reduce the chances of disturbing them, it's best to parallel their course so that you're not cutting them off or making them turn away. You definitely don't want to come right at them because then they have to move. You always want to avoid separating a group, and especially a mom and her calf. So if you kind of come into an area where you're starting to see whales, it's good to just hang back for a minute and try to figure out how many are there and make sure that you're kind of staying away from that group so that they can stay together. And if there are other vessels or divers nearby, avoid surrounding the animals, because if you do that and you have people in all different directions, then the whale, to get around you, would have to dive down deeper. And just in doing that, you're altering the whale's behavior, which is going against those federal protections. We run a program. It's really targeted towards recreational boaters, but I think, again, there might be some helpful information here for this audience as well. And that program's called See a Spout, Watch Out. So seeaspout.org. We have some other tips for just signs to look for when you're out on the water to better locate whales and know how to maneuver around them. partly depending on what you may be observing. So I know this is not my most beautiful screen to look at, but there's some helpful links on here. So if you want to take a quick screenshot or picture, feel free to do that. And then lastly, I just want to say that we've seen quite a few news reports as of late just about these ad hoc disentanglement efforts. So people who have no professional training in freeing a whale from an entanglement in fishing gear. And I know without a doubt that everyone who's doing this has the best of intentions. When you see an animal that's out there struggling, your instinct is to try to help it. But there's a number of reasons why that's actually not the best idea. One of them just being the human safety component. Again, these animals are larger than us in almost all cases, and in a lot of cases, a lot larger than us. So while they may not have the intent to cause us any harm, if they're in this situation where they don't know what's going on, they're pissed off, there's something wrong and they can't handle it, they can't figure it out. They might be disoriented, and then having somebody get in the water or get close to them, they might react in an unexpected way. And so they have very powerful tails and flippers, and one quick flick of a tail can be and has been deadly. So there was a trained disentanglement responder who was unfortunately killed a couple of years ago, responding to an animal that was entangled. And so this is somebody who had been on the water for decades by that point and trained in doing this, and it was still unavoidable in that scenario. So the human safety component is absolutely essential to consider. The other part is that when a whale is being disentangled, there's a lot of really valuable data that can be collected in that scenario. Part of that is also just retrieving the line that's entangling the whale. So in a lot of these cases that we read about in the news, once somebody makes a cut, they just leave the line there. And so it's data that we're missing, but then that's also putting that same gear back in the water when another animal might get caught up in it. And then the last point on this is just that depending on how the whale's wrapped up in that line, you may not be making the right cut. So if you are cutting through the gear, it could actually do more harm than good. So there's just a lot of factors to it. And I would strongly advise anyone who may ever come across an entangled whale to call a local authority and have them get out on the water to handle it. So it's the safest way to react in that situation. Now I'm really pushing my time limit here. So I'm not going to go through this step by step like I had planned, but in summary, the reason that whales play such an important role in the ecosystem is because they poop. And so these whales, because they're massive and because they're eating so much, they're producing a lot of fecal matter. And that's releasing a lot of nutrients back into the water. Those nutrients are then fertilizing the plant-like critters that we call phytoplankton. That phytoplankton is responsible for giving us about half of the oxygen that we breathe. And that phytoplankton is also absorbing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So whales are basically the ocean's gardeners that are playing this really critical role for humans directly. So we have that connection where these whales are responsible for making sure that we have oxygen to breathe. And these whales are also keeping our climate healthy as well. So that's the Cliff Notes version. We have a lot more information on our website. And I'm just going to end with a plug again for our website, where you can learn more about that ecological role that whales play. Visit our species guide. And it's not too late if you're a last-minute gift giver. We have a lot of really fun stuff on our online shop that I would encourage you to check out as well.
And you can adopt a whale.
You
right?
can adopt a whale, yeah. So we offer humpbacks, orcas, humpbacks and orcas for adoption. So I talked a lot about Salt earlier. She is one that we offer, so you can learn even more about Salt. So that's also, yes, a really great gift as well.
And you
So
don't have to pay for a college education.
you don't even have to buy a pool for your backyard.
This is great. Okay, I'm going to go through questions.
Okay.
Okay, let's see here. Actually, I'm going to put my glasses on so I don't call Louise this week.
I did laugh last time when I saw that.
Okay. Is there a dolphin pod leader? How do dolphins decide to go where to go?
Good
And
question.
that is Magic C.
All right. So yeah, generally, and I guess this is the case probably for most whale species, even some of the large whales, there usually is like a dominant leader in the group. A lot of times, from what we know, that tends to be a female, but not always. So yeah, there does seem to be a leader who has just taken on that role of guiding the group, and that's also why if you hear about any of these cases of mass strandings of animals, a lot of times it can be just one animal that's unhealthy or disoriented and the rest are following, and the rest might be perfectly healthy with nothing wrong with them, but because they're so close and because they follow that leader, it ends up being a larger issue.
Okay. All right. So will humpbacks typically try to feed one school of lots of, oh, you already answered that actually. How can we help to protect the critically endangered species? Evan.
Great question. It depends on the species. Different, our work to protect these whales has different actions based on what the animals need. In terms of the North Atlantic right whale, one thing that can be done right now, there's a bill that's sort of just sitting in Congress. I don't think it's made any recent action, but it's a bill that has been in process, that would open up federal funding for protections of the North Atlantic right whale, and also investment into testing what we call ropeless fishing gear. So it's basically using new technology to develop a way for fishermen to retrieve their gear, like traps for lobster and crab that are set. There's technology that is being tested now that would allow them to retrieve their gear without having any fishing line in the water, which would prevent whale entanglements. So there's information on congress.gov. It's called the Save the Right Whales Act. I would encourage you to look into that, and then you can write to your local legislators to support that bill. And in other cases, like for the southern resident orcas, one of the actions that we've been working on and have had some success with is actually removing some dams that are in the Pacific Northwest. These river dams are preventing the salmon, which is the food source for these orcas. It's preventing the salmon from really thriving. So if we're able to remove the dams and petition the owners of those dams to take them down, then we're increasing the food source for these orcas. So those are two examples. And then beyond that, I would just say, whether it's our website or another advocacy group or conservation group, just look into their websites and kind of see what work they're doing, because we'll always have information on how our supporters can get involved.
Okay. All right. Do all right whales lack a dorsal fin? Donna.
They do. Yep. So the North Pacific and the southern right whales also do not have a dorsal fin. And then there's also there's right whale dolphins as well that I believe also lack a dorsal fin.
Okay. Next one. What are the lifespans of each species you have covered? So you did orcas, right whales, and humpbacks.
Yes. I'm going to cop out a little bit to start and say I don't know.
Okay, spitball.
The context to that is that we truly haven't been studying them long enough to really know for sure. That's another benefit of being able to start individually recognizing these whales. And so I'll go back to Salt, the humpback, who I've talked a lot about. She was seen in the mid 70s. We know that she's at least in her mid 40s, closer to 50 maybe. She could be way older than that, and we just don't know. So generally, we think it's pretty similar to a human lifespan. I would say probably the same for North Atlantic right whales, although a lot of the ones that we know that have died recently have died much younger, unfortunately. And then orcas, the oldest known orca, they actually nicknamed Granny. And she was, I think, a few years over 100. So
I saw that in a documentary, actually.
Mhm.
Okay, another question. I've recently learned what ambergris is, having watched Blacklist on Netflix. Can you tell me more about this and if it is in fact money as a commodity product?
So yeah, so the ambergris has been, and I guess is still maybe used in perfumes, because it's a preservative. It has preservative qualities to it, so it's helpful in perfumes to preserve that smell over time. So that's where the money's at for it. Um, Really not super familiar with it too much beyond that, but what I can tell you is that in US waters, we've gotten emails before with people sending us a picture of something they found on the beach asking if it's ambergris. And of course, everybody, wants to know, did I just, is this my pot of gold, basically? In US waters, because all marine mammals are protected, that actually includes all of their parts as well. So technically, if you found ambergris in US waters, you would have to let NOAA Fisheries, the federal agency, know about it, and it can't be claimed as personal property. It is protected as though it was part of the whale. So people don't usually like when I say that, but it is true, and I think it's definitely something to consider. But in other cases or in special cases, yes, there could potentially be money made from finding a sample of ambergris.
Okay. The only whales I have dove with are minke whales located in the Great Barrier Reef. Any info on them? Probably on your site, right?
Definitely on our site. Yep. They're a species that we see here off of Massachusetts as well. They are the smallest of the baleen whales, but even at that, they're still about 30 feet long. So a respectable size. My favorite fun fact for minkies is that they have these little white patches on their flippers that we call minke mittens. And those, similar to the humpback's white flippers, those mittens glow pretty bright white as well. But they tend to be pretty fast because they're smaller. And in some areas they might be more friendly, but at least around here in New England, they're pretty shy. So we don't usually get a good look at them.
Okay. Which species may we most likely see when we're in Maui?
I would guess humpback. Well, and it depends too. So like I mentioned the spinner dolphins in there, and they're definitely seen in the area as well. But for large whales, I would say probably humpback would be the most likely.
We see them breach a lot actually down there. It was interesting when you said that they don't breach often. We every single day, the last time we were there, and we were there for 2 weeks, every single day going out on the boat, we saw breaching going on. And I was wondering
Really?
if that had to do with mating.
Yeah, I was just gonna
Right.
say probably is more likely in their mating grounds, which would be, in those warmer tropical areas.
Right.
Whereas, where we are is their feeding ground. So here they're like super focused on finding food. That's like almost all they care about. And so yeah, probably, and because when they are mating, they get frisky.
Yeah.
There's a lot of activity that goes along with that. So yeah, more likely to happen during mating, and also with calves and younger whales too. We think they just have more time to kind of play and figure out what their bodies are capable of, and so oftentimes we'll see younger whales that are breaching.
We even got to see a battle.
Mm.
There were 4 or 5 males battling over a female, is what we were told.
Yeah.
It was pretty spectacular. Okay.
Were you in the water for that, or on a boat at that point?
No, all of these breachings we would see like on our boat ride to our dive
Okay.
site. They were never close to us. I mean, I would guess they were probably, half a mile or more away from us, but they're such enormous animals that you see this enormous thing come flying up out of the water. You can,
Right.
it was plain to see. It was spectacular. And actually, I told you also when we were at a wreck dive, and I literally, my entire body was vibrating. It was so loud from the song the male was singing. And I never saw him the whole dive. And then when I got on the boat, like I said, the baby surfaced 10 feet from our boat, the mother on the other side, and then the escort on the other side of her. And they were enormous.
Yeah.
So,
It's
okay.
amazing.
Yeah, it was spectacular. I just wish I would have got to see him underwater. I was like, ah. Oh, okay. I've seen news stories recently about orcas being aggressive with boats. Any ideas on what drives that?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I've seen those stories too. It's really puzzling. I mean, some people are just making jokes that it's like, all these years of being disturbed and now it's their revenge. And I can probably eliminate that one from the realm of possibility. But it's bizarre. It kind of has us all stumped. I mean, the only thing we can think is that maybe these, I don't know, they just all of a sudden got territorial, or are just defending something that we're not seeing.
Right.
It could be any number of things, but it's definitely very unusual.
Okay. Where do whales' bodies end up after they die?
Another good question. A couple of places. They do sometimes wash up on shore. And that only happens if I don't know how detailed we want to go here, but the buildup of gases in the body cause them to float, and then they'll kind of wash in closer to shore as tides come and go. So
They
that's
also become
definitely
food for other animals, right?
They do, yeah. So in cases where, and even if they do wash up on shore, you'll see things like gulls and other scavengers. But there are certainly plenty of whales that die that we never see because they just simply sink to the bottom. And in those cases, there's actually species, at least one that I know of, it's a type of worm that only exists in whale carcasses. So they actually form this whole unique ecosystem as the carcass sinks to the bottom of the ocean floor, that there are these critters that will go down and scavenge. So yeah, really, really kind of crazy. And you think of whales in the afterlife, and then they're still playing this really important ecological role.
Nothing's wasted in nature.
No, it's true.
Monica, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for giving us this gift. I hope everybody enjoyed. I'm looking like I'm talking to people. I hope you all enjoyed. I know everybody enjoyed. There's already comments over here saying thank you and wow, and that's cool. Thank you for today's presentation. It was a delight. I know you guys offered to do more, and I'm going to take you up on that. So I just want to say thank you, and thank you to everybody who has, come in to listen. And I hope everybody has a great holiday.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here. And check out our website. I can also share my email for anybody who has additional questions. And
excellent. And do you mind if I put this presentation on the website so people can see it? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
The more the merrier. But yes, we hope that we'll be able to do some future presentations with you guys too.
I would love that. Maybe not the whale poop one, but I would love it.
It's fascinating.
I'm sure. All right. Thank you. You have a good day.
You too. Thank you. Bye, everyone.